Let's jump right in. If you've been tracking the pharma space lately, you know it's in the middle of a massive shakeup. But the data that just dropped from this past July, it shows a trend that is so unexpected, honestly kind of counterintuitive, that we absolutely have to break it down today.
Our source actually hit us with this exact headline. Semaglutide generics regain momentum in July, but few brands lead the charge. And right there, that perfectly sets up the contradiction we're going to untangle in this explainer. How exactly does an entire sector experience this overwhelming massive surge, but only a tiny handful of brands actually reap the rewards?
Section 1. The Semaglutide Story. Okay, to really grasp the market forces at play here, we've got to acknowledge the absolute gravity of the compound itself. Now, we all know semaglutide has completely revolutionized diabetes care, and it's triggered a literal global boom in weight loss treatments. But we aren't just talking about a popular new drug here. We're talking about a level of demand that reshaped the entire healthcare industry basically overnight. It's the engine behind a true global phenomenon.
And that brings us to the core market reality, a craze defined entirely by supply and demand. I mean, with global fascination at an absolute all-time high, the sheer scale of the demand has set the perfect stage for generic alternatives to step up. The original brand name manufacturers literally just cannot produce enough of this stuff to satisfy the world's appetite. And you know how it goes. When you have a supply vacuum of that magnitude, the market is going to rush in to fill it.
Section 2. July's sudden momentum shift.
So after a period where the wider generic market was, trying to navigate all those complex regulatory hurdles, securing supply chains, trying to build manufacturing scale, July hit like a definitive inflection point. The generic engines finally roared to life, generating this striking spike in market activity. The sheer scale of the momentum rushing back into the generic semaglutide space was just undeniable. You can see how this played out. Momentum in the previous months was definitely there, but it was stifled, right? Probably by those early logistical bottlenecks we just talked about. But then July arrives, representing this undeniable, sudden spike in generic activity. And when you set that against the backdrop of total market capacity, which is still incredibly high, it's super clear that July wasn't just some random blip. It was the sudden realization of this market's vast, untapped potential.
Section 3. Rise of the generics. Historically, the original patent holders completely dominated the landscape with exclusive options. Period. Then, as market opportunities started to pop up, we saw those initial generic entries start to, test the waters a bit. But this recent data, it shows a rapid evolution, a sudden, explosive spike from those early entrants. The transition from total brand name dominance to widespread generic activity accelerated dramatically over a very short window.
And the crucial takeaway here is that generics regained momentum for one simple reason. They are perfectly positioned to fill the severe supply gaps left by the original brands. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do. They're fulfilling global demand, offering highly accessible alternatives for patients, and capitalizing on the unique market conditions that ultimately fueled that July surge.
Section 4. The few dominating brands.
Now, just when you think this incredible wealth and momentum is spreading evenly across the generic pharma industry, our source reveals a pretty massive twist. This right here highlights the core mystery of our explainer. While the total generic market is experiencing this broad, undeniable momentum on paper, the reality on the ground is that a very select few are actually driving the charge. The total market is surging, sure, but the tangible financial success? It's heavily concentrated in just a handful of players.
I mean, look at this split. A tiny, tiny fraction of players is disproportionately eating up the vast majority of the July market momentum. With dominant brands taking such an overwhelming share of the success, it leaves an almost non-existent sliver for literally all other generic manufacturers. This points to a really steep inequality within the sector. It tells us that simply being a generic semaglutide producer right now, it's just not enough to guarantee a win.
Breaking it down further reveals a severe bottleneck happening behind the scenes. We've got the recognized leaders who have high momentum and are totally dominating the charge, highly likely because they already possess the advanced infrastructure or just a perfect market positioning to scale up immediately. Meanwhile, you have the rest of the pack. They are technically present in the market, but they're scrambling. They're failing to capture the momentum of the July surge, and honestly, they're being left largely in the dust.
Section 5. What happens next?
So, having this highly concentrated success right in the middle of a global boom leaves us looking at the future of pharmaceutical access with a pretty critical eye.
The path forward means carefully watching how this dynamic plays out over the next few quarters. First, we've got to continue analyzing the underlying momentum data to see if this trend actually sustains itself. Second, we have to closely monitor those few leading generic brands to see exactly how they leverage this newfound dominance. And third, and perhaps most importantly, we really need to watch for the smaller competitors attempting to break through that severe bottleneck. The real question is whether these dominant brands solidify a brand new monopoly or if the market eventually opens up to wider, healthier competition.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. Will this generic monopoly hold, or will smaller brands eventually break through the bottleneck? As the semaglutide boom rages on globally, will the rest of the generic manufacturers finally get a piece of the pie, or is this exclusive club permanently closed? It is a fascinating dynamic, and it's one that will shape healthcare access for years to come. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember, never stop questioning the data.